Welcome to ACS Webinars, bringing you the best and brightest minds in chemistry, live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern. To view our upcoming schedule, please visit acs.org/acswebinars.
And thanks for the opportunity to speak to everybody today about what is a topic, I guess I could say, that is near and dear to my heart. I am going to preface my presentation by the fact that I am a toxicologist by training, and so you're going to see a bit more of a toxicology slant to this presentation. But what it's really designed to do is to get all professionals who have an interest in this area to start to think about what their contributions might be, and hopefully by building off what you're seeing that we're doing today from a toxicology perspective, that this can really spark some ideas and interests in this areas on how we can extend these things beyond just toxicology parameters and hazard assessments. So with that, I'm going to start just briefly to talk about why we would even want to focus on alternative selection, and then give a little bit of background on current guidance that's available for alternative assessments, and then I want to really highlight what the key challenges are that we face as we continue to try to implement this type of a framework, as well as some of the difficulties that we face in decision making. Go forward with a few recommendations highlighting some of the steps that we're taking here at the Dow Chemical Company, and then finish up with emerging needs that I see on the horizon, and then open it up to all of you for any question and answer. So why do we care, or why do we even need to look for alternatives? You can look almost anywhere, and if you're in the industry of producing and selling products, you know that there continues to be increasing pressure to find more sustainable and safer alternatives. There are a number of regulatory drivers to replace chemicals of concern, and we've seen these in the EU with their REACH authorization process as California begins to implement their safer consumer products regulation, and as we've been looking at TSCA reform. Also, many corporations, Dow included, has sustainability initiatives, and these can include things like greenhouse gas reduction, energy conservation, raw material preservation, and reduced hazard options. And then maybe perhaps more importantly is consumer and customer drivers, as we're starting to see banned lists of chemicals and increasing desire to achieve eco-label certifications for products that are on the market today. Now, an alternative assessment is a process that can really help to guide the evaluation and selection process of a better alternative. So if you think of it as a process to identify and compare either a chemical or a non-chemical alternative that could replace a chemical or technology of high concern. So it's just there to help us guide that process. And the characteristics of an alternative assessment framework are pretty well established. You can look at any number of frameworks that have been developed to help guide assessors through this process. And if you look at those frameworks, what they typically address are the general principles of the assessment, but they don't really give a lot of detail on how you're going to actually go about and make the comparison and reach conclusions. And we'll get a feel for this as we get further along in the presentation. General principles can vary by framework, but often they place a heavy emphasis on hazard traits, and attributes that are included are things like technical performance, feasibility, cost, again the hazard, environmental and human health, exposure, life cycle considerations, and sometimes even social justice. So I'm going to turn it over to Lynn to ask all of you a question so we can get your input at this point. Lynn?
Great. Thanks, everyone. Throughout the session, we're going to have a couple of poll questions. And the first poll that I'm going to ask you to answer quickly while we're going through it is, what is the reason for your interest in alternative assessments? And the choices that you have are to meet the sustainability objectives of my organization, to meet the requests of my customers, to meet the current or future anticipated regulations, or to stay ahead in the marketplace. I'll give you a few seconds to answer, and we will review the results right away. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's see what the results look like. Okay, great. So what we're seeing here is almost a tie for the top place. 32% of people said that the top reason for looking at alternative assessments was to meet the sustainability objectives of the organization. And a very close 31% said to meet current or future anticipated regulations. Interestingly enough, the lowest of those four choices was at 14% to meet the requests of my customers. So there's a lot of comments that I think can be made out of those results. And Pam, I will pass it back to you and let you either comment or continue with your presentation from there.
Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, those are very interesting results and probably a bit unexpected, but looks good. All right, let's go on then. And what I wanted to do is to help give you a flavor for how these alternative assessment frameworks work is to just give you a couple of examples so you can start to appreciate the process that needs to be put in place to be able to effectively compare alternatives. And so here's an example from the Lowell Alternative Assessment Framework, and you can see that they start the comparative assessment by identifying what the target of action is, and then to look at end uses and functions, and then to start to identify alternatives. And then we get into the evaluate and compare piece here at the bottom. And I just want to highlight that these are typically shown as silos. You've got human health, social justice, economic feasibility, technical performance, and that within each one of these silos there are different tools that you can use to generate information on those particular areas. There are differences in the quality of data that you're going to see. You are going to see probably sometimes gaps in information when you're trying to compare two candidates. And there are going to have to be some weighting or some judgment that's going to be as you compare attributes not only within one of the silos but also across the silos. And here's an example from the German UBA, so it gives you an idea of how they're looking at a framework on alternatives assessment in the EU. And you can again see that there are a number of attributes that are cutting across a variety of disciplines, and that again it's going to require a way to gather information, evaluate the quality of that information, and be able to address gaps and weight that to make decisions where you can ultimately decide whether the candidate that you're looking as an alternative is a good choice to replace the existing product or material. So comparing alternatives is not an easy process. It really requires expertise across disciplines and across product life cycles. And so as you look at the different types of disciplines that are involved, there's a huge breadth of expertise. It also requires very different tools depending on the expertise that's providing the input. And more importantly, it requires an integrated assessment. It's not going to be very beneficial if just me as a toxicologist is trying to make assessments only on the hazard if I'm not considering these other aspects. And so we need integration, and we need a way to balance trade-offs between the different silos. So I like to say that the devil is in the details, and while these frameworks that we have are good starting points and they give us some guidance sort of on the route that we need to take, as they say there are many roads to get to Rome, and we want to identify the road that is going to lead us to the best possible destination, which is truly a sustainable alternative replacement. And so as you start to get into these comparative assessments, it's important to understand how you determine and compare what's most important for an alternative assessment. How do you weigh one chemical against another, particularly if you have less information or there's a different profile compared to the established products? What's the minimum information that you need? Is there, information that we can eliminate? Is there information that is going to be more critical than others to discriminate between the two options? How do you get data, or how do you fill data gaps? What are some of the best practices? are they scientifically robust? Are they vetted methods? How do we apply emerging tools and technology into this framework? And how do we deal, again, with trade-offs and conflicting results and weighting? Because as you can imagine, as we're all trying to struggle with how we do this and how we do this well, we could very well come up with different conclusions based on aspects that we deem important as part of the assessment. The other reason why this is really important with understanding the details for how we're making these decisions is that we really want to avoid what I call regrettable substitutions. In other words, we replace an existing chemical or product with an alternative only to find out itself that we've either transferred risk to another place in the value chain or it itself has issues that we identify later on down the line after it has been introduced into the market. And you might think of an example where we're looking at a consumer product and we may be substituting a particular component in a consumer product and making a decision based on that. But then we also need to understand how that might impact manufacturing of that product or how it might affect the waste or disposal of that product by making that substitution. So we can't make these decisions in single isolated silos. We really have to have a more integrated approach to fully assess the impact of the choices that we're making. So the real challenge is, first of all, developing new molecules and replacing them is expensive. And not only that, but we have to make sure that what we're selecting is going to be technologically feasible, going to be able to deliver the same or better value in cost and performance, is going to have an improved profile for human health and our environment, accounts for economic and social considerations, and really can result in the potential to have lasting change because, as I said, we want to avoid choosing an alternative that in and of itself may end up being restricted in the future. And I just want to give you a case in point, and I'm going to give you an extreme case just to kind of make the point. But if you look at agricultural product development, it is a very resource-intensive process. It takes about 10 years and $250 million to research, develop, and register a new product. They are tightly regulated. There's one in about 139 chemicals that successfully progresses from R&D into the field, and a product has to undergo more than 100 regulatory studies just to support the registration for the health and safety assessment of that material. So you can imagine that getting it right the first time is not only good for human health and the environment, but it does also good from an economic standpoint because we're able to save resources, time, and money. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lynn to do another question to ask all of you for some input based on some of the challenges that we're seeing with the frameworks and tools. So Lynn, I'm going to turn it over to you again.
Great. Thank you, Pam. So the next poll question that we're going to look at is, what are some of the challenges with the tools and the frameworks that you use today? And the choice of the answers are not simplistic or standardized enough for non-expert users, insufficient handling of data gaps, can't weigh the attributes, the framework or tool is missing a key attribute, no single tool fulfills all my needs, or the cost and or time to complete the alternative assessment. We'll give you a few seconds to respond. We will close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so our poll results, as always, will be interesting. And it looks like this time, again, a fairly wide spread on the popular answers, with the single most popular being no single tool fulfills all my needs. And the only one that did not generate over 20% response is the framework tool is missing a key attribute. The rest were fairly evenly distributed between the other three responses. So I would say, Pam, there's a lot of different issues that are affecting people with their alternative assessments today showing up in our poll. And I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Lynn. Yes, absolutely, and not surprised to see no single tool fulfills all my needs. And I think that that's the expectation that a lot of people have, that there will be a magic bullet somehow, that there will be one tool that will take care of everything. And I think as we go through, what we'll see is that's not the case. So I want to continue and just talk about, so what can we do? What are some of the strategies that we can put in place that can really help us identify the best alternative? And how do we stop ourselves from not making any decisions or any progress in this area because we're afraid of making a bad decision? So I'd like to call this, how do you avoid paralysis by analysis, constantly trying to get more and more information because you're afraid to make a decision because it might be the wrong one. And then let's talk a little bit then how you can actually use alternative assessment to drive innovation. So I'm going to share a little bit with some of the steps that we're taking here in the company that I work for at Dow, and I want you to understand that these are just steps, or the initial steps, and these are things that I think, if we look at, are good conceptual frameworks for us to build off of as we look at how we enhance our ability to integrate more across the different expertise areas to make more informed decisions as we're making substitutions and selecting alternatives. So the first thing that I think is extremely important is that whatever we're doing needs to interface with project management, and we have started doing this here at Dow. And what we are doing is we are integrating it into what is called our Stage 8 concept, and that really is not something unique to Dow. It's something that a lot of companies use as they're guiding their product development. And a couple of things that I just want to point out is that as you're starting out with an idea for a new product or a new chemical or a new technology, the investment is small. And as you continue to get closer and closer to launching, the investment gets much greater. And so what we realized very quickly is that what we need are tools and things that are disciplined but flexible enough for the stage gate process, and that we have to have some well-defined criteria for when we advance to the next stage based on the tests that we're looking at. We want to do front-end loading. We want to generate as much information as early as possible while we still have options to make changes at a lower cost. And we are willing to fail fast and succeed early with those options. So we may be using some tools and screening options that have more uncertainty around them early in the product development stage, but we're willing to absorb that risk to be able to eliminate poor candidates early. And this is where we look at the two phases of R&D development, because if we eliminate poor candidates early, then the likelihood of those that do advance further in the product development scheme are going to have a much higher probability of a successful launch and being more sustainable. So in this process then, what we're helping to do is when we're looking at alternative candidates is not only looking at equal performance, but making sure that we have an acceptable toxicity and environmental profile as well as equivalent economics. So you can use this process then with alternative decisions to drive early decision making to help guide more innovative product selection. And the way that we can do this is early in the R&D phase, we can use screening tools to help guide selection on molecular design. And then these can inform the selection of those candidates that will advance further into more robust safety and sustainability assessments, and can inform additional testing or data gathering to help further guide selection and refinement for getting into the pre-manufacturing phase, optimizing our formulations, looking at exposure, and then ultimately reducing the amount of dollars and time that we're spending on developing candidates, and helping us to better manage end of life to then launch more sustainable alternatives. And this is really, I think, the value proposition is that in doing this, in building this early into the process, not only are you increasing the probability that you're going to launch more sustainable alternatives, but you actually are saving time, resources, and money as well. Now, how can we do that? It's guidance, 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 and we really need tools and processes that give us clear and flexible and transparent mechanisms to make assessments and to select those candidates that are going to go forward. And so what you're looking at here is actually a work product out of the HESI Sustainable Alternatives subcommittee, where we're actually adopting a stage gate approach to identify for key attributes in the alternative assessment types of information and tools that might be used at various points in the product development stage. Now I'm going to use hazard as an example because I think hazard is probably so far ahead of the game in having the tools and some of the rigor around the assessments that need to be done to happen in this area that it just lends itself to be the attribute that people focus more on. Hazard data is often more standardized, it's easy to get at, and it is where everybody seems to be defaulting to, because trying to understand information for exposure, risk, life cycle type of attributes is much more difficult to get and to compare. So let's look at hazard as an example. What are we doing? So early in R&D development, we have established a cheminformatics platform that helps identify tools and output that we can actually use to help guide the selection of candidates that will advance further on into the product development scheme. And you can see that we started to catalog things according to quantitative structure-activity relationships, things that can help us look at analog ID, and then data mining tools as well to help us generate, again, as I said, as much information as we can as early as possible to guide informed decision making. We have developed an expanded list of search tools that we can now use to help guide that collection of information that we can assess. And then what we do is we're selecting candidates from in silico assessments and making decisions to move on, we can then start to confirm whether those early predictions are accurate and further make determinations on the best candidates to move forward into product development. And the way that we're doing that is to focus endpoint assays that are aligned with regulatory endpoints that we have today in toxicity testing, and then using these to make early decisions. So if you look at the assays that we are starting to use to confirm our in silico assessments, you can see now that we have a number of biological assays that are available that can help confirm some of the early modeling information that we've used and further increase the probability that when we're selecting a chemical to move forward that it's going to indeed have a more favorable human health and environmental toxicity profile. So the way this works is we're using a tiered assessment, again, that is built into the stage gate process that starts with our cheminformatics program to mine data, both our internal and publicly available data, and then we can use that to select those candidates. We can use the in vitro biological profiling to then confirm earlier results and to help guide where we need to go in the future for testing to address specific questions that may arise as we're evaluating that information. And ultimately, by the time we have a candidate that's ready to go into standard regulatory testing, this information that we have on the material going forward should lend itself to a very favorable product going forward from an environmental and human health profile. And so this is the implementation. It gets a little more resource intensive as we're going through, just like the product development stage. And then we're integrating information as we're going along to confirm what we learned earlier, to see if it's confirming our results, and to build that knowledge base. So let's just look at an example. I'll call it a success story that we had recently where we were able to use this approach, and this has to do with a substitution for an existing fungicide that was on the market, and it was being targeted for elimination due to a teratogenic effect that was observed in a rodent test. And what was observed was cleft palate and torticollis, which is a head tilt, and it results in the mice not having very good balance. And so this material was going to be phased out for a less hazardous material. And what you can see is that, I go back here, is that the issue is the otoconia, which are the little canals that contain what we call ear dust that helps an animal position itself and know where it's at in the environment to have balance. Those were not developed. And so you can see here in a normal control animal, these little curly structures are normal otoconia, and in the animal treated with the fungicide, they're absent. We knew that this material was composed of 6 isomers, and evidence suggested that 2 of the isomers were not teratogenic, and so we actually worked with the R&D chemists to discover a method that we could use for large-scale isomer production. And then because of that ability to scale up production of those isomers, we were able to test them in a mouse teratogenesis study to screen for isomers individually to see which ones did not exhibit the teratogenic effect. So here's where a partnership with chemists and the toxicologists working together can identify a path forward to actually help produce some more sustainable chemical by understanding where the toxicity is being elucidated from. And so it turned out that one particular isomer was selected as the candidate for substitution. When that isomer was manufactured and tested in a subsequent developmental study, you can see that not only were there no developmental effects, but it also was much less toxic than the existing material. And it also retained its fungicidal efficacy. So here's a really good example of having the tools available to assess materials early can help identify the candidate that can be advanced forward and resulted in the commercialization of a non-teratogenic replacement. Now, as we look forward to emerging needs, clearly I think guidance is extremely important. I think that there is general agreement as you're out there working with other professionals in this area that we really have to start to go beyond hazard and start to incorporate other attributes that are also very important parts of any sustainability assessment when we're looking at the selection of alternatives. So more life cycle assessment type of attributes, risk and exposure, as well as cost, performance, and in some cases social responsibility. There also needs to be some standardization in the current methodologies, although I will say we also have to have some flexibility in how we implement that depending on what the goal or the driver is for the alternative assessment. And we really have to have a clear process for handling the data gaps and the ability to transparently weigh multiple attributes as we're looking at these decisions that we're making in the selection of safer alternatives. And again, then flexibility in tools and methods that can really be tailored and aligned to the stages of product development, because those are the things that are going to increase our options. And when I say product development, I would take that to include all the way to the regulatory stages. So tools that will be good and useful for, say, as an R&D chemist is developing a brand new product will be substantially different than a regulator that might be looking at existing information for 2 products that may already be on the market. But either way, there needs to be a process for how we're going to handle disparity in information, making decisions about what attributes are more important, and then having the flexibility of those tools to help guide us in those assessments. The other important area is increased collaboration across expertise. I think that today we tend to still operate in our technical towers, I guess I'll call them, and we really need to start to pool expertise across academia, government, NGOs, and industry, because as you can understand from what we've just seen, this is a very broad and a very complex process that we're looking at, and it really does take the pooled expertise to balance all of those assessments so that we do reach one of what we would consider the best conclusion, and we aren't getting ourselves into an area where we may have a regrettable substitution on our hand. For that reason, HESI has established a Sustainable Alternatives Subcommittee. The subcommittee has been in existence for about a year and a half now. It does have a multi-section of expertise, and they are really focusing on a couple of what I think are the most important aspects that need addressing in order to effectively carry out alternative assessments. The frameworks we have are great, and I think they're a great place to start. But as I said, the devil is in the details, and as you start to actually try to conduct one of these types of assessment, you quickly run into issues. And so they're focusing right now on attributes, tools, and data gaps, and they're starting to look at tools and prioritize where these tools might best be used depending on where we're at in the product value chain or product development process. And they're also working with key experts on methods that we can actually use to make decisions that can be transparent, that can give a person a good sense for what was deemed important and what wasn't as they were making these decisions in the selection of an alternative. So if you're interested, and I'll say this because I know there are a lot of, it looked like from the demographics I got, a lot of industry members out there, we would love to have you make an inquiry about the subcommittee. You can contact myself, or you can contact Jennifer Young-Tanner, who is the HESI representative. The expertise that's needed here is definitely, as I said, broad, and we would certainly welcome additional expertise. So in summary, I just want to highlight that there is growing interest and growing demands for the use of alternative chemical assessments, and this is coming both from the regulatory, the business, and consumer drivers. We need to move this beyond just hazard. Many of the tools and things that are out there today are highly focused on hazard, but we have to start to tackle the issue of how do we bring in the other elements that may be a bit more difficult to assess and compare. I think building on the model for hazard ID that we're using here at Dow and that other areas are using, building it into a stage gate process where you're able to have tools and methods to inform the selection of alternatives throughout the product life cycle is very, very important, and that these tools really need to start to be developed for things like exposure, life cycle type of attributes, and the economic and societal values. We are lacking in good tools to help guide decision in those areas today. And then again, greater collaboration across the expertise. We have to start to break down those silos and work more across them as we're looking at this large issue to balance those trade-offs so that we are really, truly developing and selecting alternatives that are going to have lasting impact for change. So with that, I just want to put in a plug for another ACS training program, which is the ACS SciMind program, and this is a very good program to consider if you're interested in understanding more about product development and safety assessment. They offer a program on assessing the fundamentals of toxicology and risk assessment. And this is really a community-based training program where scientists can get together and actually interact in live sessions and share knowledge and learn together. And you can see that there are some upcoming sessions in 2014. And if you're interested in that, I would encourage you to visit the SciMind website. Also, I've added at the end of this presentation just some available tools and frameworks as reference material. Again, these are things that I would say could serve as guides as you're starting to look at what options you have to help guide your practice in alternative assessments. And you can see that there are a number of tools from industry, government, NGOs, and then a few references for life cycle assessment for those that are interested.
Thank you for watching this presentation. ACS Webinars is provided as a service of the American Chemical Society as your chemistry source for live weekly discussions and presentations that connect you with subject matter experts and global thought leaders concerning today's relevant professional issues in the chemical sciences, management, and business.